Hello, good people. Welcome back to Russian Retention. That's what I'm calling it. This is George's book. In the first video, we introduced this book. In the last video, we took a few notes. In this video, I'm getting into the very first exercise. Here are the rules to it. I read one page at a time, and then I answer a few questions. This is the first page of the story. They drove out of town at 8:30 in the morning. The paved road was dry. A splendid April sun was shedding warmth, but there was still snow in the ditches and in the woods. Winter, evil, dark, long, had ended so recently. Spring had arrived suddenly, but neither the warmth nor the languid, transparent woods, warmed by the breath of spring, nor the black flocks flying in the fields over huge puddles that were like lakes, nor the marvelous, immeasurable deep sky into which it seemed that one could plunge with such joy, offered anything new and interesting to Maria, who was sitting in the cart. She had been teaching school for 13 years, and in the course of all those years she had gone to town for her salary countless times, and whether it was spring, as now, or rainy autumn evening, or winter, it was all the same to her. And what she always invariably longed for was to reach her destination as soon as possible. She felt as though she had been living in these parts for a long time, for 100 years. And it seemed to her that she knew every stone, every tree on the road from town to her school. Here was her past and her present, and she could imagine no other future than the school, the road to town and back, and again the school, and again the road. End page. The questions. What are the questions? So the first question here is, what has the page done to us? There's a bit of melancholy. Things seem rather monotonous. Question 2, what are you curious about? The woman in the story, where does she find her joy? Where's her joy come from? Maybe she has no joy. I'm also curious about how the author is going to stimulate this woman into feeling something. Question 3, what do I know that I didn't know before? I have a woman who is bored with her life. She's been teaching for 13 years. Marvelous changes around her, but they are all nature changes. So maybe she's meant to spend her days in Tokyo and New York, and this is all just boring BS to her. These wonderful nature changes aren't having, they don't mean too much to her. She finds them boring and monotonous. She just needs that paycheck and get back to doing boring things. The next question, what do you know so far? All the things I've just talked about. Do you see the story differently now? This is the very first page, so the story hasn't changed for me. What do you think happens next? What do I think happens next? It being a short story, we're not going to have a whole lot of time to sit here and waddle around in this boredom state. We're going to have to get right to it. You know what I mean? There needs to be conflict introduced into this. We need to rock her a little bit. We need to put her up a tree and throw rocks at her. Her life is too boring, and we're going to inject some excitement into it. I have a sneaking suspicion it's going to be sorrow. I think another question on here is, where do I think the story is headed? So what I think happens next is different from where I think the story is headed. Where I think the story is headed, there's going to be some kind of tragic thing that introduces her to the joy of simple living, things like nature, the changing of the seasons, these wondrous things that are happening all around her. I think she's going to find a way to become a part of that. What's the easiest way to make people pay attention to life, usually with some kind of big loss? So that's where I think the story's headed. Do I want to keep reading? Is simple enough? A page? Give me another page. Let's see how it goes. What is the story about? George notes that what a story is about can be answered by looking at how the story made us curious. Curiosity is a form of caring. What do I care about? Well, I care about the woman, and I want to see what happens to her. Last question on here. Who do you care about in the story? Maria. What is the flavor of that caring? That's a cool question. What's the flavor of that caring? I kind of don't care about her. She's leading a boring life. I care enough to want to see her be able to change that. That's the extent of my caring. When do I care about her? She felt as though she had been living in these parts for a long time, for 100 years. It seemed to her that she knew every stone, every tree. She's bored with her own existence. And I guess that's sort of where I begin to have an interest in Maria. Can't wait to turn the page and find out what happens. But I've answered these questions. Our answers to these questions are now what the author has to work with regarding expectations. And our enjoyment of the rest of the story is dependent upon how the author handles and deals with those expectations. So that'll be interesting, right? How's this author going to handle my expectations? All right, let's find out what George of the jungle, what George suggests here. In that first line, we learn that some unidentified they are driving out of town early in the morning. They drove out of town at 8:30 in the morning, they. I guess I didn't really even pay attention to that. I just sort of pictured her in the back of like a wagony kind of thing. Somebody's, driving that thing. They aren't important to me. The paved road was dry, a splendid April sun was shedding warmth, but there was still snow in the ditches and in the woods. Winter, evil, dark, long, had ended so recently. Spring had arrived suddenly, but neither the warmth nor the languid, transparent woods warmed by the breath of spring, nor the black flocks flying in the fields. George says, I bolded the two appearances of the word but above, and then in parentheses, and one of the reasons why I kind of dig George's vibe, he says, and yes, I phrase it that way to avoid saying I bolded the two buts above. Funny guy. But anyway, he bolded the two buts to underscore that we're looking at two iterations of the same pattern. The conditions of happiness are present, but happiness is not. It's sunny, but there's still snow on the ground. Winter has ended, but this offers nothing new or interesting too, and we wait to hear who it is, taking no solace in the end of this long Russian winter. Who is it that isn't enjoying the end of winter? I did not notice those buts when I read it through. Let me look at it again. The paved road was dry, a splendid April sun was shedding the warmth, but there was still snow on the ground. This is one of the reasons why I frown at literature, is people go delving into looking for meaning, and I just gloss right over that shit. But I'm not going to start digging into stories like that. That's zero fun, unless you just want to go sleuthing around for that, and that's your kick. It's a meaningless exercise. What is the story imparting to us? And if you have to go rooting around and finding bullshit, then fuck off. I don't want that. But this, but that. No, I didn't catch that. I don't agree with the author. What else? He says that even before there's a person in the story, there's an implied tension between two elements of the narrative voice. One telling us that things are lovely, the sky is marvelous and immeasurably deep, and another resisting the general loveliness. I didn't get that. You can say it, and I can see what he's talking about. But I'm telling you, as me as a reader, I didn't pull that out of it. Is it because, I don't read close enough? I got the gist of it. The seasons are changing. There's nothing wrong about winter. I know they said evil, dark, but I read that stuff, and then I was just like, that's bullshit. Winter's pretty awesome. It was just a mischaracterization, right? I don't find winter to be that way. So if that's your take on winter, Mr. Author, then fuck off. I mean, we're not talking the same language. So no, I didn't pick up on that, the duality. There's no duality here for me. It's changing. Change is great. Summer sucks when it gets to the end of it and you're looking forward to not be so damn hot anymore. And then when it gets cold, you're tired of the cold, you're looking for it not to be so damn cold anymore. The change is great. There's nothing wrong with each piece. Literature's fucking annoying. Of all the people in the world he might have put in this cart, Chekhov has chosen an unhappy woman resisting the charms of springtime. I don't even know that you say she's unhappy. I don't know that she's unhappy. She's ambivalent. She might just be bored. I don't know that she's unhappy. Yeah, you're putting that in there. I'm not getting that out of her. He notes that this woman could have been a newly engaged person or somebody that is just naturally happy. But Chekhov decided to make Maria unhappy. I don't know that she's unhappy. She's bored. So fucking what? She's bored. And she's failing to take joy. And there's a lot of people that don't stop to smell the flowers with joy. I go out and I hug a tree and I love the grass. I look at all the leaves doing on the trees, right? A lot of life blowing in the breeze. And all those molecules and a lot of things I care about that most other people don't. Does that make them unhappy and me a bundle of joy? No. So I can't read into Maria that she's unhappy because she's not paying attention to this shit, right? So I'm not buying that she's unhappy yet, even though they've said it twice. Then he makes her unhappy in a particular flavor for particular reasons. She's been teaching school for 13 years, has done this trip to town countless times, and is sick of it. do they say that she's sick of it? She'd been teaching school in the course of all those years. She had gone to town for her salary countless times, whether it was spring now, blah, 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 blah. And all she really longed to do was reach her destination as soon as possible. I want my cash. She felt as though she'd been living in these parts for a long, long time, for 100 years. Monotony, monotonous. And it seemed to her that she knew every stone. Here was her past, present. She could imagine no other future. That's a bit dreary, right? Not being able to imagine a different future. But there are people, I've met them, they aren't looking for some grand difference in the future. They'd like it to just continue on in the beautiful way that it already is. So again, I'm not buying what's being sold here. She's been teaching for 13 years, done this trip countless times, and is sick of it. I'm not buying it, George. I didn't get where she's sick of it. She feels she's been living in these parts for 100 years, knows every stone along the way. Worst of all, she can imagine no other future for herself. Is that worst of all? Is that the worst thing of all? Is imagining no future that's different? Some people don't want to imagine a different future. So that didn't ring my bell. This could have been a story about a person unhappy because she's been scorned in love, or because she's received a fatal diagnosis, or because she's unhappy since the moment she was born. But Chekhov chooses to make Maria unhappy because of the monotony of her life. Again, I don't know that she's unhappy with the monotony of her life. I haven't gotten that from the story yet. Maria is a person that's unhappy because of the monotony of her life. I'm not pulling that out of the story at this time. Now Maria is here, unhappy, so George claims, and the story has become restless. Not for me. The story has said of her, she is unhappy and she can't imagine any other life for herself. I get that. She's interesting enough to find out what kind of boredom she has. Is it an unhappy boredom? I expect the next page to tell me more. And I guess I kind of would like to learn more. Not just because it's in this book and I'm doing the exercise. I want to know a little bit more about Maria. What flavor of monotonous boredom is this? Because I hate monotonous boredom, but I also know people who don't. So I can't read into Maria that she's unhappy with her life. I need the next page. The story is underway. The first page has radically narrowed the concerns of the story. The rest of the story must now address, use, or exploit those concerns and not any others. If you were the writer, what would you do next? As a reader, what else would you like to know? I think I've said that, and I've made that clear, is I want to know the context of her boredom. I do think something's going to come in and jostle her life. This is the end of this. This is the end of the very first exercise. Cheers.